Hello and welcome to Passing Priority. My name is Mike and today I have a deck built around a new card from Strixhaven. However, this card will not be our commander. The deck I'm building today is built around the new sorcery card, Dragon's Approach. Dragon's Approach is a 3 mana sorcery for 2 and a red. It deals 3 damage to each of our opponents, and then we may exile it and 4 other cards named Dragon's Approach from our graveyard. And if we do, we'll search our library for a dragon card and put it on the battlefield. But the important line of text for Dragon's Approach is a deck can contain any number of cards named Dragon's Approach. This means we can run more than a single copy in our deck. And for this deck, I'm choosing to run 25. But our deck will need a commander. The deck I'm building today is mono red, and I've included 3 different options for us to choose from. Our first option is Neheb the Eternal. Neheb the Eternal is a 5 mana zombie minotaur warrior, and at the beginning of our post-combat main phase, we add red to our mana pool for each 1 life our opponents have lost this turn. If we cast a single Dragon's Approach in our pre-combat main phase, and deal 3 damage to each of our opponents, in our post-combat main phase we'll add 9 red mana to our mana pool. This is enough to cast 3 more Dragon's Approaches, or some of the many other cards we have in our deck. Our second option is Torbran, Thane of Redfell. He is a 4 mana dwarf noble, and when a red source we control deals damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals an additional 2 damage. This turns our Dragon's Approach from dealing 3 damage to 5 damage, decreasing the amount of Dragon's Approaches we'll have to cast to kill our opponents, and decreasing the amount of time they'll have to react. And our final choice of commander is the one that I'm going to choose for myself, and that is Chandra the Bold. She is a 5 mana human knight. Whenever Chandra the Bold, or an instant or sorcery we control, deals damage to a player, we exile the top card of our library, and we may play it this turn. Whenever we cast a Dragon's Approach with Chandra out, we'll exile the top 3 cards of our library, and we can play those this turn, be they lands or more Dragon's Approaches. For this reason, this is why I'm choosing her to lead this deck. But if you would like to swap her out for Neheb or Torbran, both will do wonderfully piloting this deck. But before I get started on the rest of the deck, if you would like us to build a deck around a commander or a commander idea you would like, leave it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it when the deck comes out. To start our deck tech, let's look at our ramp. We're running the classics of Sol Ring, and we're running some 2 mana rocks in the form of Arcane Signet, Mind Stone and Thought Vessel. We also have 3 more mana rocks at 2 mana, but these will enter tapped. They are Cold Steel Heart, Fire Diamond and Star Compass. We have a Mirrored Landscape in the mana base, which we can sack to go fetch 2 mountains from our deck onto the battlefield. And we also have one of our alternate commanders of Neheb the Eternal as mentioned earlier. We're also including the ritual one-off effect of Mana Geyser. For 5 mana we add a red for each tapped lands our opponents control. This would be great, as for 5 mana we could net ourselves 10, 15 or even more mana. I also want to mention here 2 artifacts that, while not ramping us, will reduce the cost of casting more Dragon's Approaches. Locket of Yesterday makes spells we play cost 1 less to cast for each card with the same name in our graveyard, meaning that eventually we can get our Dragon's Approaches down to costing a single red. And Twinning Glass will let us pay 1 and tap, and we can cast a non-land card from our hand if it had the same name as the card we've already cast this turn. Let's move on to some of our draw options. For our draw spells, I've either chosen mana efficient draw spells, or spells that will also damage our opponents, speeding up the clock to killing them with burn damage. For our low CMC spells, we're running Faithless Looting, which will let us draw 2 and discard 2, and we can flash it back for 2 and a red. This is great because if we want to cheat out a dragon, we can even discard some Dragon's Approaches to help us get a dragon cheated out even faster. I'm including Magmatic Insight. For 1 red and the cost of discarding a land, we'll draw 2 cards. And Thrill of Possibility, we can discard any card and draw 2 additional cards for just 1 and a red. I'm also including some cards that will make our opponents choose if they want to take damage or draw us cards. Browbeat will either deal 5 damage to a player or we will draw 3 cards. This is a great way to refill our hands, and as we're pressuring players' life totals, finding a player who's willing to sacrifice 5 life will get harder and harder toward the end of the game. I'm also including Risk Factor. While Risk Factor will only deal 4 damage, it has the Jumpstart ability, meaning we can cast it from the graveyard by discarding a card and paying its mana cost again, so we can use this card twice. I'm also including some wheel effects that will have the added benefit of damaging our opponents. Korvath's Fury will let us for each player pick friend or foe. All the friends will discard their hand and draw however many cards they had plus 1. But for each foe, Korvath's Fury will deal damage equal to the number of cards they have in their hand. This can refill our hand while pressuring opponent's life. I'm also running Wheel of Fortune. Each player will secretly choose a number. Then all players will reveal what they've chosen. The player who chose the largest number will take damage equal to that, and then everyone but the player who chose the lowest value will wheel their hand away and draw 7 new cards. If we keep pressuring life totals, people are not going to want to pay a lot of mana to wheel their hand away. While our main game plan for our Dragon's Approaches is to burn our opponents, we are including some dragons that will draw us cards. 2 of the dragons we can go tutor for are Dragon's Mage and Nullspine Dragon. Dragon Mage, on dealing combat damage to a player, will have each player discarding their hand and drawing us 7 cards. And Nullspine Dragon, on entering the battlefield, we can choose to discard our hand, and we draw cards equal to the amount of damage dealt to a single opponent this turn. If we cheat Nullspine Dragon out with Dragon's Approach, we will guarantee draw 3 cards, but if we cast 2 or 3 copies in a turn, this could easily refill our hand. This next series of cards don't draw us cards, but they are card advantage. We will get access to more cards than we had before, even if they don't go to our hand. One dragon we could cheat out with Dragon's Approach's effect is Backdraft Hellkite. Whenever Backdraft Hellkite attacks, each instant and sorcery in our graveyard gains flashback, meaning that we can cast our Dragon's Approaches a second time, and then they'll exile themselves. This will reduce the amount of Dragon's Approaches we will have to find, to take our opponents from 40 life to 0. We also have Past in Flames, a sorcery that does the same as our dragon, giving each instant and sorcery in our graveyard flashback. This card can also be flashbacked as well, meaning that for 2 turns we can give all our instants and sorceries flashback. One of our big effects that we can use for Dragon's Approaches in our graveyard is Mizzix's Mastery. We can cast this for 3 in a red. However, most times we want to overload this, which will be 5 and 3 red, so 8 mana in total. But if we can overload it, we can exile all instants and sorceries in our graveyard, and then for each one we make a copy, and we can cast those copies without paying their mana cost. If we've already got 5 or 6 Dragon's Approaches in our graveyard, we can cast Mizzix's Mastery, and we basically get to recast them all again. This is an 8 mana way that we could very quickly win the game. Some of our card advantage engines are going to be very unique to the Dragon's Approach strategy, as they only benefit when we cast an instant of sorceries that we have cast already. Harness the Storm says that whenever we cast an instant or sorcery from our hand, we may cast another instant or sorcery from our graveyard with the same name. We'll still have to pay its mana cost, but this will effectively draw us another copy of the card. Plus, the card will stay in the graveyard, meaning that we'll still get to use it later on for Dragon's Approaches or some of our big plays. Pyromancer's Ascension. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery that has the same name as the card in our graveyard, we'll gain a quest counter. Then whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, if Pyromancer's Ascension already has 2 or more quest counters on it, we get to copy that spell. And Spellweaver Helix, on entering the battlefield, we can exile 2 sorcery cards from our graveyard. Then whenever we cast a sorcery that has the same name as one of the cards exiled, we can make a copy and cast it without paying its mana cost. But probably the card that most people are expecting me to say is coming up here. If we're casting multiple copies of the same card, it'd be great if we could cast them all in a single turn, and that's why we're including a Thrumming Stone. Thrumming Stone will give all our spells Ripple 4. But the only cards we care about are Dragon's Approach. Whenever we cast Dragon's Approach, we may reveal the top 4 cards of our library, and then we may cast any copies of Dragon's Approach that we find within them. Each of those cast will also have Ripple 4, meaning that we can go again and look at the next 4 cards. We are running 25 copies. That means 1 in 4 cards in our deck is Dragon's Approach. This means that, while not perfect, we may be able to go 2, 3 or 4 deep as we cast these spells. And if we want to make sure we can get it, the first dragon we want to be cheating out is Hoarding Dragon. When Hoarding Dragon enters the battlefield, we search our library for an artifact, exile it, and then we shuffle our library. And when the Hoarding Dragon dies, we may put the exiled card into our hand. Let's discuss our removal. Our removal package is a little smaller than in most decks, because our deck wants to burn our opponents fast, rather than have a long game where we have to answer their permanents. We're running a Braid. A Braid can either deal 3 damage to a creature, or destroy an artifact. We're also running Chaos Warp. We can shuffle any permanent into its opponent's library. Then we will reveal the top card of that library, and if it's a permanent, they get onto the battlefield. This might not be an ideal answer, but it's a great way to get rid of the permanent that's a problem now. We're running Earthquake as our sole board wipe. As well as dealing X damage to each creature without flying, it also hurts our opponent's life totals. This could be a board wipe, or with some of our big mana ramp, this could be a way to end the game. And I've also included Chandra's Incinerator. While 6 mana, this can reduce its mana cost for the amount of non-combat damage dealt to our opponents. That means 1 3-mana Dragon's Approach reduces this all the way down to 1 mana. And whenever a source we control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator will deal that much damage to a creature or planeswalker that player controls. Now our Dragon's Approaches not only hurt their face, but hurt their board as well. I also want to give a special mention here for 1 card, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. All Chandra's activated abilities are useful. Its first +1 will get us card advantage, and if we don't use that card, we'll hurt our opponents. Its second +1 is mana ramp, its -3 is removal, and if we can ever get to its -7, I think we're already winning the game. But to finish this deck off, we have some cards that will enhance our burn plan. We've already mentioned one of our commander options, of Thorben, who will add 2 damage to all of our Dragon's Approaches, but I'm also including Electrostatic Field. Electrostatic Field won't add damage, but whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, Electrostatic Field will do 1 damage to each of our opponents. This effectively makes our Dragon's Approaches deal 4 damage. The same is true for Gutter Snipe. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each of our opponents. This takes our Dragon's Approach to 5 damage per card. And also another Planeswalker of Jaya, Venerated Fire Mage. Whenever another red source we control deals damage to a permanent or player, it does that much damage +1. And a final piece of extra burn is in our mana base, we're running Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle. Whenever a mountain enters, if we have at least 5 other mountains, Valakut will deal 3 damage to any target. Unfortunately, this won't be buffed by any of our increasing damage effects. However, the incidental damage this will give us along the way will add up over time. And with our 35 mountains in the mana base, we're definitely not going to have a trouble hitting mountains. And that's it. Our Dragon's Approach deck, helmed by either Sakara, Torbran or Naheb. That's your choice. A link to the deck list can be found in the description below. And don't forget, if you want us to build a deck about a commander or a commander idea you would like, leave it in the comments. And also, why not comment down below the card that you're most excited from Strixhaven 4? I've always wanted to play Burning Commander, and Dragon's Approach gives me a great option to do that. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye for now.